Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 242 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on how can you support people with mental health difficulties during December and the holiday period. And it's Saturday the 9th of December 2023 as I record this. So this podcast episode I've been so excited about all week, not only because of my own concerns, my own fears about the month of December, but also because I've had an absolutely brilliant week, and lots of these techniques that I talk about in today's episode is actually the reason why. So I'm really excited. Again, I think this is quite a practical one, of course. Nothing on this podcast is ever any sort of official advice, but this is a fun episode, quite insightful, and I know that you're going to get a lot out of it, whether you're a current or future clinical psychologist, or whether you know people with mental health difficulties, or to be honest, even if you just want a few more tricks and ideas for yourself in case you ever get a bit depressed in the future. And whilst I say this is very much a December-based podcast episode, this can actually apply to any time throughout the year because mental health is not just limited to 1 month of the year. So, but you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So, moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, fragile tics may pave a faster way to diagnosis. People with Tourette's syndrome make brief and involuntary movements and sounds, repeatedly blinking, for example, or grunting. These tics usually begin in childhood. Currently, to receive a diagnosis of Tourette's syndrome, a child must have had movement and sound tics for at least a year, which, by most measures, is quite a wait. But that may change. A recent paper in the Journal of the Royal Society Interface describes a method that could potentially cut that year-long diagnosis time down to just a day. Per Belieber at Washington University and colleagues report that timing of tics in someone with Tourette's syndrome shows a fractal pattern, an infinite pattern that is self-similar across different scales. Not only that, but they report that the degree to which tics follow fracture patterns can predict how severe their condition will become. Okay, this I think is actually quite a fascinating one because one of the biggest problems with the DSM I find is that, and to be honest, I sometimes get quite annoyed about this problem, is that there's a time limit. And now I understand why there's a time limit. For example, depression, I think you've got to be depressed for at least 2 weeks, and then for an anxiety condition, you've got to basically have this anxiety for about 6 months. Quite oversimplified, but you will get my point. And then acute stress disorder, which is the sort of precursor to PTSD in some situations. That's a maximum of a month, but more than 3 days. So anyway, though, I think that this whole time thing can actually be quite annoying. So if there's a way that we can actually decrease this waiting time and this period of suffering, as I like to call it, because let's face it, if you're depressed for those 2 weeks, or to be honest, let's use a more realistic example, or maybe a slightly better but so let's use like social anxiety disorder. So for those 6 months, that person does have clinically significant levels of distress, but because it's not been the 6 month mark, we can't help them. Clinical psychology does not care about them, to be honest, which I always think is quite funny considering that's the whole point of the profession. But there's tons of problems with the DSM. This time thing doesn't really make the top 10. So, if we can find research based ways to actually cut this waiting period down to just a day or two, then that is absolutely brilliant because we can start helping people, we can start improving lives sooner. And if we're going to take the code calculated version, which is what most of the governments look at, then people can get back to work sooner, they can start earning earning money, paying tax, and so on. I always hate having those conversations with people because to me mental health is so much more about just getting people back to work, which a lot of people in the profession I agree with. But it's just when you're talking to people outside of a clinical psychology, then you have to start talking about the whole money aspect. So the second one is dropping the mask takes two, and this one I really love. Neurodiverse people frequently describe their experiences with modifying their behaviour in order to camouflage their differences or to fit in with neurotypical people. Whilst the strategy, known as masking, can ease social situations, keeping it up for a longer period of a time can be a very tiring endeavour, leading to burnout, poor mental health, and loss of identity. In a new paper published in the journal Autism, a University College London team explores one facet of masking: authenticity, or how genuine people feel when they engage with others. Looking closely at interactions between autistic and non autistic people, they find a number of themes that help to illuminate the concept of authenticity as actually experienced by autistic people. So I won't go into what specifically the BPS said, but I love the point of this. Authenticity is such a big point there because I'm like on this podcast, I'm very all authentic. Authentic in my books, my non-fiction, I'm very all authentic. But to be honest, if you were to meet me in person and if I didn't know you, my authenticity would dramatically decrease. This is stuff that you can't say. Some stuff needs a certain level of a friendship. And basically, yeah, like as an autistic person, I very much put up a front. And that's something that I'm learning with one of my current friendships, because they're also all autistic. Yes, we can be very direct. We don't have to mask. We can just talk. But because I've been surrounded by neurotypical people for so long, and I've not had many autistic friendships, I just like keep using the same techniques, which is problematic to the extent that I know tons about my friend, but my friend doesn't always know that much about me. But then when we text, well, yeah, but like when we text though, because we were texting like last night, it's sort of like the opposite. Because when we have in-person interactions, my friend just talks for Britain. Like my friend just tells me tons of stuff, which I love. I flat out love it. But I don't in person. But then when we text, I tell them tons of stuff about myself, and they don't. So that I actually think is like quite funny. It's something that I've actually got to work on. So authenticity, it is very much a tricky one for all autistic people, though. Like especially when you're the sort of autistic people that can be very intense at times, as I've been called, as my friends been called. I think it's one of the reasons why we get on like so well, because we can both be very intense to each other and we don't care. Yeah, that's authenticity. It's a very interesting one, and it's nice that there's more research into it because I find it quite validating, and I think that smarter people than me will actually be able to use this and to come up with some quite good interventions, or at least put this in a more applied setting. The last one is also related to autism. Mapping long-term mental health in autistic kids. Previous research has shown that autistic children often experience mental health concerns. I think that's the understatement of 2023. Studies investigating mental health in autistic people, however, often use mixed age samples and analyze single time points, leaving us with a bit of a blind spot. How might the trajectory of autistic children's mental health shift and develop as they age? This is the question that inspired recent work by Dr. Nicola Wright at Manchester Metropolitan University and colleagues. In their latest paper, they investigate both the types and timings of mental health issues in autistic and non-autistic children, illustrating their mental health trajectories, as well as the varying trajectories experienced by those of different genders and classes. So I really do encourage you to actually go over to the BPS website because they actually go into a lot more depth. But this, I think, is just a fascinating point for two main reasons. Firstly, research methodology. Why, when you're looking at mental health, and yes, I'm going to be the world's biggest hypocrite here because of my own research at the moment, and to be honest, I do understand why people do this. But in an ideal world, if you're looking at mental health, you would use a longitudinal research study and research design because, of course, you want to see mental health over a period of time so you can definitively say that it improves or it gets worse. That's what you want. But of course, longitudinal studies, they're labor inattentive, they cost a lot of money, and they're just not ideal from a practical standpoint. Ideally, you would only do longitudinal studies when it comes to mental health, but you just can't do that always. But also, I think that it's really interesting from the point of view as myself and some of my all autistic friends, though, because I've always said that because from my own experience, autism caused me the most difficulties, and that's a polite way of putting it. When I was about 16, that was when it was starting to become quite troubling. Plus, there were tons of other factors that really didn't help. But then I think that after the age of 16, because I've learned how to deal with it, I've learned how to cope, I've learned how to mask and mimic other people like a lot better. Like I sometimes joke like to myself that I can play the neurotypical game and come off as perfectly neurotypical, like better than anyone. Of course, it's a complete and utter lie, but it's a fun joke to make with myself like at times. Anyway, though, so it's really interesting that research is starting to be done in a longitudinal design, and just so we can start to rely less on the anecdotal evidence and more on the empirical facts about this trend. Because after I identify what's the peak mental health difficulties or the period of a child's life where most autistic people will then struggle, then we can hopefully start to use that information to create a better support for autistic people. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the person update. So we're moving on to the person update. I have had one of the best weeks in months. I have utterly loved this week. And to be honest, there's not even really a particular reason why. I've just had such a sensational week and I've been the happiest I've been for ages. And I think there were quite a few reasons, and some of them I am actually going to share with you. So, one of the best reasons, and this sort of harps back to last week's podcast episode, activity scheduling. I have been doing so many activities that I enjoy. I've been doing lots of writing. I've gone back to learning copyright law, which I flat out love, and I've not done it since my breakdown in August. I love copyright, and yes, that is such a niche interest. And yes, I appreciate none of you probably have that interest to be honest, I think that the only interest most of myself and my podcast listeners actually share is psychology, university, and mental health. Basically, stuff like that. But I've been doing like a tons of stuff that I love. I'm really like happy and I'm really excited. And then there's also been like some like social stuff going on. For example, Wednesday was actually a really good day because I had a university like social with my lab and lots of other like great people that I really like mixing with. So again, that's a massive tip for university students. If there's a university social, and you're a bit nervous about it, go to it. Just try it out, have fun, because you're probably in there enjoy it a lot more than you actually think. And also on a Wednesday, we had our brand new stats lecturer. And in case there's any new podcast listeners for this week, the reason why we've got a new stats lecturer is because we complained so much about the last one. The university had to make them step down, and he was such a horrific lecturer. How he was a lecturer before at Sussex, I have no idea. So that was quite interesting. But this new lecturer, well, to be honest, she's not a lecturer. She's a PhD student that helps out with the teaching. This was the first time she's ever lectured. She basically had to lecture for 4 hours. She was really good. She was really, really good. And I've learned more in 4 hours than I have in the past 10 weeks. That's how bad my old lecturer was. And to be honest, quite how good the new lecturer was. So I'm really, really pleased for her. And I hope she does take up lecturing though, like in the future, because she's really like good at it. And then there were tons of other things like going on. Like for example, I've got like fun projects. I've actually studied like Duolingo, which is the language app, but I won't talk about that because I talk about that in today's podcast episode because I want to make a specific point about it. And then there was some really, really joyous stuff going on, but I won't share that on the podcast for different reasons. It's a brilliant week. It was a lot of fun. And after the past few months, it feels so amazing to be this happy again. So life is absolutely brilliant and I love it. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can just email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by working with children and young people. So, what I actually need to do a podcast episode to officially launch this book, I absolutely love it because, as we know, we're in like a clinical psychology. One of your four major clinical populations is working with children and adolescents. So what this great book really helps you to understand is how do a clinical psychologist work with different people, for example, multidisciplinary team to actually help children and young people. So we talk about the UK mental health services called CAMS and the different tiers and like how that's like structured. But then we also talk about pediatric psychology, which is actually a lot more interesting than I think. And then we also talk about working with children with physical health problems and how that impacts them like psychologically. And we also talk about so many more great things that I absolutely love. Like working with children and adolescents, we really do sink into this great topic in a lot of really easy to understand depth. So I know you're going to love it too. So that is working with children and younger people, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my wonderful patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you want to become a patron and get tons of great rewards, then you can by heading over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. So let's dive into the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how to support people with mental health difficulties during the holidays. This is going to be a great episode and I'm really looking forward to it. So let's dive into it. 3 reasons why people with mental health difficulties struggle during December. Before I talk about my own fears and anxieties surrounding this December, I wanted to approach the topic more broadly, and then I'll talk about different ways to support people. Firstly, there are a lot of social pressures at this time of year, and this affects people in different ways. For example, there are always a Christmas and family parties to go to, university socials to attend, and everyone basically implies that you need to be happy and joyous or just stay away from Christmas. Since in my egg experience, no one is interested in dealing with a depressed or non-joyous person during the holiday season. As a result, this could place a lot of stress and only amplify an anxious or depressed person's negative automatic thoughts and only make them worse, and that I say in air quotes. Since they might believe that they will be judged even more than usual during this time of year, meaning that it's the social pressure of the holiday season that can negatively impact the mental health of depressed and anxious people. A second reason why the holidays might be difficult for people is because someone isn't with them this year. I mean this in terms of a passed away loved one. But actually, this could be your first Christmas after a divorce, a bad breakup with a long-term partner, or something else happening in your life. When this happens, then Christmas could be a painful reminder of that loss, and it could trigger a lot of unwanted memories, or it could be an awful reminder of the world they live in. For example, a world without a parent or partner. This is even more painful for the person if they don't have any or many ways to help deal well with their feelings. For instance, I know the year that my paternal grandmother died, there wasn't a lot of options for me, or for most of my family, to grieve, or know how to react at Christmas time, since we didn't want to bring down anyone else in the family, and friends that don't know only go so far. Thankfully, in the end, we did all talk about it, and it was okay. And even 3 years later, Christmas is a reminder of that loss. A final reason that I'll mention in this podcast episode is domestic violence, abuse, and neglect. There are hundreds of other reasons, but these reasons are the focus of the podcast episode. Since children and family members have been off school and work during the holidays and most of December, this can be a nightmare for people in abusive relationships and families because they are home more often. They cannot escape off to work or school, but to get away from it, and because of the stress of creating the perfect Christmas that everyone tries to do, this could lead to abusers snapping and lashing out. Overall, there are a lot of reasons why Christmas is a triggering from a lot of people, and the entire month of December can cause people to feel extremely anxious and concerned. Thankfully, there are a lot of things that people can do to support each other during this month. Why was I scared and anxious about December? So before I talk about the 5 ways how you can support people, I want to briefly explain why I, past tense, have been flat out terrified for December and the holiday season, as well as this podcast episode was mainly inspired by my own struggles with this upcoming time of year. So I won't repeat the whole mental health history because at this point it's very well documented on the podcast. But I've noticed a very scary pattern for when I have meltdowns and awful mental health. My meltdowns tended to happen when I was out of my routine structure because that kept me grounded. For example, had a meltdown in Newcastle because I was away from university, my friends, my family, and my therapy staff, and that pattern has largely stuck ever since. As a result, when I started to think about December and how all my friends were going back to their homes, the university was of course closing for the winter break, and there would be a lot of other changes because of the social side of Christmas. I was flat out terrified of having another meltdown and experiencing a lot of bad mental health. And this time I didn't think it was avoidable, simply because these changes were happening no matter what I did. The month of December was going to be completely out of my control, and that scared me. This led me to get very anxious, a little depressed, and I was constantly walking around with a lump of fear in the back of my mind, sort of like a countdown until the next meltdown. Yet, thankfully, I spoke to my university counsellor about this, and he gave me a lot of ideas that I've expanded upon, and I find them really helpful. And I hope that you find them useful too. Make sure you know where to get help. One of the most useful things my university counsellor helped me with during the final session was making sure that I knew where to get support if I needed it. I think that's a flat out critical for someone with mental health difficulties because, as we all know, us and our clients get mental health flare ups outside of the therapist's office, and we might not have anyone around us that can help us when we need it. Therefore, it is really useful to know who can you return to when we need some help, support, and guidance. So I'm just going to share an extract from a random therapy reflection that will appear in a future book. And no, I have no idea which one. I've just written it and it might pop up in the future because it explains how my university counsellor helped me. Open quote. As my therapist could see that I was genuinely concerned about DSM, his main focus was making sure that I had the information I needed to reach out to other mental health support services in case I was having an intense moment when I needed support, as well as he gave me a lot of other pieces of support that would be useful to me. For example, because I'm awaiting my autism diagnosis, my therapist told me how the university recently changed its policies so people with suspected mental health conditions and people awaiting diagnosis could get support. So he advised me to go to reception and book an appointment with a disability advisor. I hate the term disability because I refuse to see my autism as a disability because it has helped me so much in my life except make friends, but I took the advice anyway. In addition, he told me how there is an urgent mental health support available at the university Monday to Friday in the afternoons. Therefore, if there is a crisis, then I can email or just come in to get access to this urgency support. That is very useful to know because you will never know what the future will bring. Something else my university office is in the evenings, but I forget which evenings to be honest. There are out of hours mental health practitioners available. This isn't too helpful because I'm not on a campus in the evenings because I live so far away, but it's still good to know that they're there, and it's so good to be aware of. In addition, in the UK, we have something called Samaritans, which is a mental health support charity that my therapist told me how to use. Since these aren't trained professionals, they aren't counsellors, and they aren't therapists. Instead, the Samaritans are people to call and basically sit with whilst you have your mental health difficulty, so they can make sure that you're okay and you can't do anything to yourself or others. And then they allow you to talk and they guide you through this difficult time. Also, I still will have access to my own private therapist from August, so I do will have her as an option too. Finally, he advised me to sign up for Canterbury Community Counselling Service, which is meant to be a great service that provides free or low cost ongoing counselling options for people. And because of this, a long waiting list, as no one really ever comes off it, but it's still meant to be really good. So I haven't signed up yet because I just haven't, but this is a great resource apparently. Overall, probably when it comes to fear and anxiety, knowing what support you can get is critical. And having these sort of conversations was really useful in understanding how there was a lot more support available to me than I thought. Close quote. As a result, if you're a person who experiences negative mental health, then make sure that you know how to get support over the holiday season, as most mental health services, like the NHS, are closed over Christmas. As well as if you're a current or future clinical psychologist, then it might be an idea to double check that your clients know what support is available to them during the month of December. Sometimes you won't be able to support them, but there are plenty of services that might be able to over the festive period. Make sure you will have a plan for bad mental health. Something I really liked that my private therapist suggested when I popped in to see her the other week was that she stressed the importance of having a plan that was written down. Of course, I refused to do this at first because I know what makes me feel good. I know how to feel better. But I knew what the problem was with this. Because as she mentioned, when we get depressed and when we have bad mental health, we forget the stuff that makes us feel good. She was right, of course, because I can know all that I want about mental health, but it's only useful if I can use it when I'm feeling bad. As a result, my point here is that if you believe that this will be helpful, and I don't think that this hurts her to try, then make sure that you or your client writes down a list of things they enjoy. This means when they have a bad mental health, then they can look at the list, remember that they enjoy it, and try to motivate themselves to do it, so that they can get a pleasure from the activity and start to feel good again. Because that is a flat out critical. And here are the activities listed on my list: fiction writing, podcasting, writing blog posts, learning a copyright, talking to friends. Of course, I think only the last one is relatable to any of you, but the point still remains. If I'm feeling bad, then I can look at the list and make myself do an activity because it gives me a pleasure. And as I mentioned in last week's podcast episode, activities help to improve your mood. A self-compassionate advent calendar and activity scheduling. So, speaking of last week's podcast episode, I wanted to remind you that activity scheduling is flat out critical at all the times of the year for mental health. So, definitely make sure that yourself, your clients, and anyone you love has a lot of fun activities planned for the month of December. This means that they'll be doing behavioural activation, and this benefits their mood as they'll be doing pleasurable activities. In addition, you can do the normal activity scheduling idea that I mentioned last week, which is by scheduling these activities in a normal online or paper calendar. Or you can do something a bit more fun because it's the holiday season, and I flat out loved this idea. So my university counsellor mentioned that I should do myself a self-compassionate advent calendar. And maybe me thought, oh, well, why don't I take this idea one step further? So what I did was I wrote down all the days in December, and I made sure that I had at least one thing to look forward to every single day this month. And my thinking behind this is that if I feel down or depressed, I can look at the date on this advent calendar and I can make sure that I've done the activity for the day. And it also means that I have stuff to look forward to for the rest of the week too, and stuff that I can get excited about. So here's an extract from the week this podcast episode goes out. Monday the 11th, writing. The 12th, some outreach work. 13th of December, Christmas meal at my social group and meeting up with my supervisor. That will be a lot of fun. 14th of December, writing. 15th, catching up with a friend. 16th, family Christmas meal. That will be interesting. 17th, moonpig cards. Which I admit, that's a weird one, but I'm actually going to explain it. So, as you can see, this week contains a wide range of different types of activities to get excited about. And I admit, doing moonpig cards might not sound very exciting, but in my family, I am very famous for writing cards that make my parents cry. So that's always fun. And I hope that it's giving you some ideas. Another reason why I wrote down all of the days in December is because I can highlight each day before I go to bed and I can visually see how many days left in the month I have. And this I found really useful because it's good to see that it was the 6th of December, so about 20% of the month, and I haven't had bad mental health yet. It was also useful to see that I'm probably going to be perfectly okay. Even today's data, which is the 9th, is basically 32% of the month, and I've been fine enough for ages. So this month will probably be a brilliant month after all. As a result, I would say it might be useful to work with a client, yourself, your loved one, to create a list of fun planned activities that you're going to find enjoyable and get a lot of pleasure from. That way, this gives you another way to help manage this scary month. Do something new. Moving on to our penultimate idea for how to support people this December. So in early December, because I was so scared about this month, because I was just waiting for a meltdown, I wanted to try something new and I wanted to try and be as busy as possible this month. And the thing that I chose has actually been a lot of fun and it did help with my mental health a lot. So I've decided to learn French on Duolingo. But they don't sponsor today's episode at all, but Duolingo is actually brilliant. It's really easy to use, it's a really fun, and it doesn't take long. I think my longest lesson was 3.5 minutes. That's because I kept having to listen to a pronunciation, as well as it's reminded me just how much I enjoy French and learn other languages. Because I do love languages, I do love culture, but the only problem is because I was mute as a kid. I've struggled with English enough, to be honest. So trying to throw in another language, and of course the English education system doesn't take language as seriously as it is, but that's way beyond this podcast episode. So I was always going to struggle learning another language, but Duolingo is actually quite good. As a result, it might be an idea to do something new and learn something this holiday season. You might download Duolingo and learn another language that you've always wanted to. You might take up an art form that you've always been interested in, or you might want to buy a few books on an aspect of the history that you've always wanted to know more about. I think learning is a powerful tool if it's something that you enjoy, since it takes your mind off of your concerns and your mental health. And these language apps are designed to be games, so they're fun, and it feels nicer to be accomplished. Like I always feel good when I get 100% on a lesson, and I get a little well done and whatnot. It's just a thought, but you might enjoy it. I know I have. Be with friends and family. So the final thing that I want to wrap up this podcast episode with is going back to the basics again, because yet again, I always forget the basics when I have bad mental health. Because I've been talking with 3 girls that I did my funny project with, and I've contacted one of my oldest school friends because she sent me a Christmas card, and I just realised how nice it is reconnecting with people. It's nice knowing what they're up to, and it's good to reconnect and forge new friendships. And I've actually liked it so much that next week I might even contact 2 of my other oldest school friends, because I haven't really spoken to them in years. Like I like and I comment on their Facebook posts, but that's about it though. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. Like how are they? Because like I hope they're okay. So that sort of communication and just reconnecting will also be quite nice. Therefore, my point is, and this goes for everyone, remember to text your friends and family this December. You don't have to have a long conversation, but as long as you contact them, then it's something. It's still some social contact that you weren't getting before, and that's important. You might need to schedule you contacting other people in, and that does make you weird or anything. I've actually got quite a few things on my advent calendar, like contact that person, contact that person, contact everyone. It just means that you want to do it. And you might need a little more help to actually get round to doing it. I can promise you that if contacting all of my friends wasn't on my advent calendar, I would only be contacting one of them this month. That's how bad I am about social contact. Conclusion. In this mental health focused podcast episode, we've covered a lot of different things, but all of this is important. It's important to recognise that December isn't a magical, perfect month for every single person on the planet. And as future or current clinical psychologists, this is something that we have to recognise. In addition, it's a critical that us and our clients know how to get mental health support over the holiday period, have an action plan in case of bad mental health, that they do activity scheduling, maybe try out a new activity, and then maintain or make new contact with friends and family members. A lot of these tips are basic mental health stuff, but as I've learned, it is always the basics we forget when we have mental health difficulties. And now while we've spoken about these 5 tips, I really hope that they're useful in making yours or your clients' holiday season a little more joyous, merry, and filled with good cheer. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. This was a lot of fun to write up, and I'm actually quite proud of myself. Like I know I normally I'm actually extremely modest. Like a friend that was actually saying that to me like last night. So, they were saying I'm so proud of you for actually admitting that you've done something good for yourself, and like this is all you. This isn't me at all. Well, so I'm actually quite proud that I have done this episode, because this does address a lot of my concerns. And to be honest, this stuff works for me. This might not work for everyone. I fully get that. And to be honest, of course, nothing on this podcast is any sort of official advice, but I found this stuff useful, and I really hope that this helps people. Even if this helps one single person, I would have done my job as a podcast host. And if you know someone who enjoyed today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Working with Children and Young People, available in all the usual places. And you can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Psychology World Podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.